Let's talk about all things sex and recovery. Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast. I'm Brandon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers.
We're therapists.
And we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin. All right, you guys, welcome to the show. Brandon is here without Tyler today. He is off celebrating his wife's graduation. So congratulations to her. She worked her butt off and she finished. So that's awesome. And I'm glad Tyler could support her and be there for her. It's kind of the beauty of our show is that we can tag team. And we come together, we have different opinions, we discuss, but we can also show up alone and bring plenty to the table, I think. And luckily for me today, I have an awesome guest that will spur discussion and create questions that are awesome for recovery too. So, Carrie, welcome to the show.
Hi.
If you could just give a little bit of background, a little bit of context, and then ask any questions you have.
Well, my name's Kari. As you said, my husband and I have been married for almost 18 years. We've known each other since I was 16 though, so most of our lives. Right after we got married, probably a year and a half, I discovered his addictions that he's had since he was a young kid, like most stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And without having any education or awareness, really, I feel like we've done everything you should not do in the process of trying to recover.
Okay.
We kind of just have avoided it at points, head in the sand, and then tried to hit it real hard with couples therapy and individual therapy. My husband just was never really ready. And that's, I feel like, been part of most people's problems. The wives are really pushing for this, and it's hard to force someone to go face their traumas.
Yeah.
But we spent 2022, we did a little 6-month non-therapeutic, not well done separation.
Okay.
And then, but some healing was done and some things were learned. And then in October of last year, so 23, I rediscovered that he'd pretty much been acting out after that whole 6 months, and I had no idea. And then in January, I asked for another 90-day separation. And so we're kind of on the cusp of ending that.
Okay.
And that one was done a little bit better, but I feel like there's so many questions when it comes to integrating couples work.
Mm-hmm.
And even a couple weeks ago, there was the couple that came on that's in a house separation. They said they feel like they're stuck. My husband and I both resonated with that one. Because I think people are wanting so bad, this guideline and this checklist,
Mm-hmm.
Which I think I would prefer that more outside of a timeline, because I think you can't put a time on healing.
Mm-hmm.
But just more of what to look for as outside of the honesty, empathy, and consistency over time, right? Being able to get those things in line. I've really struggled with the consistency. I've watched my husband be able to almost take the lingo of the therapy world and use that towards more gaslighting. But I've never felt sexual shame through all of this, which I think has been a huge gift. Because I know a lot of women dive into what did I do wrong and how can I be better here? And just knowing it wasn't my fault. So our situation, I feel like, is kind of different, because I feel like I have no sexual shame and he's got a lot.
Okay.
So figuring out how to reintegrate that, I feel like doesn't get talked about enough publicly, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's in your world, but and then you've touched on the arousal template before, so I'm just kind of curious, figuring out what that is for you, and can you reprogram that when it's been something that was developed at an early age and very unhealthy viewpoints.
Okay.
There's so many places you could go.
There's a lot of different places we could go with this. So I want to ask you this. When you say he has a lot of sexual shame and you do not, Um, like if you could expound on that just a little bit of what does that mean in terms of the struggles that you guys have had, and where do you need help there?
I think I don't look to sex to like validate who I am, or my worth, or just having shame around my own sexuality, which I think is very rare, especially growing up in like the Utah culture that I have grown up in, and in the religion. There wasn't a lot of education really. So I never felt a lot of the things that some of these women feel, where they felt like the duty to their husbands and that they weren't there for pleasure. Like
the good girl syndrome.
None of that, which I actually like, sadly feel like that was something that was a bonus for my husband, because I am very confident in it. But it also, I think, has added to the shame of not being able to like, I mean, I've been told I'm intimidating before. So like to stand in my presence, people are just like, I wouldn't want to argue with you. I'm like, I don't argue. I want the dialectic, and people don't do that. Right. And so I think because I haven't had sexual shame, especially in our culture, jumping into someone who was shamed very early on. I mean, we're talking like 8 and 9 years old, and then it continued through his teen years. It's just kind of been developed that it's hidden and used for validation. And that's a struggle for me, because I would love for that to not be there and for us to be on the same page.
Right.
But I don't want to downplay my sexuality and my confidence because of his shame. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And please don't revert to being unhealthy so that you guys can be unhealthy together. And that question of, is it that you're too intense because you're just out there and confident and free and who you are? And then he's like, oh my gosh, this is too much. This is scary. She's too much. Or is it weakness on the other end of I have so much shame and so many twisted beliefs and all kinds of stuff around sexuality that I can't handle somebody who is confident and knows who they are as a sexual being. And I don't know for sure what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's probably that side of I have a lot of shame around my sexuality. If he struggled with sex addiction for his whole life and was raised in a strict religion, then all of those messages are driving the show when it comes to his sexuality. And so, yeah, how do you go about as a couple repairing that and working through that? Carrie, and you can tell me how this has gone, but your sex positivity and confidence and those things will probably cause some discomfort, but probably influence good stuff, being healthy. And so there's going to be friction. If it meets up against his shame, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it will also push him to actually look at things differently if you're showing up differently. Has that happened at all?
We've had moments of it, and definitely it's nice to even be able to have those conversations, because I mean, I feel we have 2 young kids we're raising right now, and one, we can talk about sex and body parts and he's fine. And then our daughter is like, you say the word sex and she's running to the other room. So I think it's been good because we can have the open conversation about it. But when it comes down to like actually being intimate and going, there still seems to just be that energy of, are you actually present in this or not? Even though we've been able to have conversation of what it could look like and things like that.
You can feel him disconnect, is what you're saying.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear there, and like, how do I show up here? Yeah, you feel that, yeah.
Yeah.
So as much as you talk about it, and he can have those conversations, when rubber meets the road in the moment, it's like, oh, this is so complicated, and there's just a lot of shame and fear there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you do, Carrie? Where do you go with that?
Right now, I don't know. I think, I mean, outside of all the other things that go into the addiction, right? There's so many pieces because it's not just, it's all forms of intimacy that struggle.
Yeah. It's Carrie, one of my kind of things, and if you've listened to me over the years, you can hear an undertone of this, is a lot of recovery work, and I put that in quotation marks, is about going to a meeting or going to a therapist or going to a group that reinforces force and control around sexuality and sexual shame and sexual self-rejection. Like the therapy programs actually say that recovery is you really rejecting that part of who you are. That's recovery. And it drives me nuts because I believe one of the linchpins, one of the major parts of actual recovery is for somebody to recover who they are, and who they are, a big, beautiful, amazing part of who they are is their sexuality. Right. And then, but then people get uncomfortable sometimes when I say embrace your sexuality. And when we talk about arousal template and things like that, know who you are, accept who you are. That makes people uncomfortable because they've been burned by just sexual acting out all over the place, right? But there's this space where you can accept who you are, know who you are, have confidence, and have boundaries with yourself still. Have healthy boundaries when it comes to sexuality, but not have the shame drive the force, which drives the behavior to stay safe sexually. You don't need the shame. Right. And so recovery is not sexual self-rejection. And I don't know if your husband has gotten caught in those traps, where, force, control, making sure, he only acts a certain way or only says certain things, is like recovery. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it too is, as much as I have like a love-hate relationship with a lot of really good podcasts, especially like yours, because you give so much good information that it can almost be like, oh, I can talk this thing, but then actually showing up. I mean, recovery, any therapy work isn't done in the session. It's done between Monday and Monday, that week in between.
Yes.
So when people can show up and like talk the talk with that, but yeah, 100% in like the force and control, as well as I think almost to the point now where I'm like, is recovery work going to be the new place you find connection versus like, is that the new coping skill versus the acting out and the behavior is now the recovery work and the forcing you into this
box.
road.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that going to be now the new coping skill versus like, what works for me? What do I want this to look like for me? Like, it's not, and I don't think, and I get like early on in recovery, you can't just ask like, well, what do you want? What is your heart telling you? Because they don't know. Like, you've got to take some time to like reprogram neural pathways and like get a healthy mindset moving forward. But then I don't feel like, at least we haven't seen yet, a space where it's just like, okay, now how does this look for you integrated in your life? Right. And a lot of, I think, spouses, especially like I'm impatient with it. And I know that, like, I'm a live in the moment, like, let's, like, we don't know if we have tomorrow, like that sort of thing. So to put that and then add the recovery and me wanting to be like, yeah, let's move forward. Like, I can forgive you. I know I'm going to be triggered through this process still. But wanting to move forward and having that impatience, it almost, I don't know how it's going to work, how it works for people to be able to take this box of recovery and put it into the three, like you say, it's your recovery, his recovery, and your relationship. Because I don't know, there's just not enough, I feel like, support and good help in all three of those areas.
there's a form of denial we call uniqueness, and what that is like when a therapist comes to a client and says, hey, like this would be helpful for you, or here's some things to look at, or and the client says, yeah, you don't get it, I'm unique, I don't need to do those things. And so it's a pushback, and it's a pushback from the reality that they need change and they don't want it. And so they use uniqueness to say, I'm not going to do that thing. But uniqueness isn't always denial. So, and this is what's tricky is if recovery is about recovering who you are a unique soul. You are a unique creation, and how you go about recovery and what you create as a result of your recovery is unique. And like if somebody, let's say I said to a client, I said, hey, Carrie, like, let's look at this, or let's think about that. And you're like, no, that, like, I don't like that. On one hand, I would love that. And on the other hand, I might feel like you're not wanting change. So the difference is whether or not, like, if you're standing in your truth, in your honesty, and in your confidence with that, awesome. That's amazing. If you're defensive because we're getting close to an exile part, or your shame's right there and it's too much and it's too hard, then you're resistant. Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Recovery is not one size fits all for everybody. Recovery doesn't look the same for everybody. But their willingness to do it is either driven from a place of love or driven from a place of fear. And back to your question about the work, the work of recovery to rebuild trust, to rebuild intimacy, to have stronger connection, it has everything to do with understanding how the fear is in the way, how the fear is running the show, and getting conscious of that, knowing that fear, seeing it, and then unburdening it, letting it go, and replacing that with truth, with authenticity. I know I'm getting out there with big principles of recovery right now. But this plays into the little nitty gritty, like in the bedroom when there's shame and there's like uncomfortability. It's about, hang on, can I stop here? Own that I have this fear. Be honest about it, talk about it, let it go, and show up in my power or in my confidence. And that's where you start to see, like, oh, that was kind of messy. It took a while to get conscious here with that. But we got conscious and we got aware of it. We let the fear go. And the more you do that, the more the fear just doesn't come around. Right. So
Right.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. And it's sparking a question of like, how often have you faced this? And I think maybe this is a fear or projection I'm looking at of my husband and other addicts going so long without acting out or having any sexual behavior to now without any work done on healthy sexuality, moving into having those interactions, right? Mm-hmm. Without putting more fear on it, because they're almost afraid that, like, oh, I think you said it, like, I don't want to open Pandora's box, right? Like, because then it's all out there without any like healthy relationship with yourself and your sexuality before you can even bring it to a spouse.
So this, what you're bringing up is the difference between like white knuckle sobriety and actual recovery. Because if I'm in actual recovery, then I'm not even afraid of Pandora's box there. But if I'm in white knuckle sobriety, then I'm still resonating in the fear and the shame around sexuality. I'm still like freaked out about it. And so if I'm engaging in a relationship with my partner and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this, I'm not in recovery. And so a man in recovery would have a lot of things going on. They'd have a lot of recovery capital. They'd know how to regulate their emotions. They'd know how to use their support system. They'd know how to get mindful and honest in the moment, and show up more authentic. They'd know that they know how to do all of those things. So when the vulnerable situation with the partner is there, they're not freaking out. In fact, their strength and their masculinity is coming out because they're grounded. They know themselves. So there's a total difference between what you just described and what actual recovery actually is.
Well, and as I listen to your guys' podcast, I try and pick out a lot of like touch points that I can utilize to see how my spouse reacts to questions I ask. So if I bring up sexuality and intimacy in that way, and he kind of gets triggered, that shows me where he's at in his recovery. Like, okay, we're definitely not close to that, right? As you were talking, how do you handle that? How would I handle that as a spouse if we are like getting ready to have an intimate moment sexually and he gets triggered and has to stop and call his support system? Because in that moment, I'm like, hold on, how can I not be that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would say, and this is hard, Carrie, but I would say, if before he was never even conscious and not using a support system and like just freaked out and just like defensive and having all the attachment issues with you, but now he's like, well, I'm conscious of it, I'm calling a support system. That still kind of sucks because it ruins the moment and isn't great, but it's movement, like in the right so for you to have some grace for him of like, okay, like he's trying to flush out the fear here, get conscious of it so he can show up with me. That's awesome. Hopefully we can get to the point where the fear's just not, the triggers aren't there so much. It's not so much about him not getting triggered, by the way. It's about him handling the triggers, in a way where he doesn't start to do things that cause issues with you. And so if you see in his eyes like, whoa, he just got triggered, and then you freak out and you're like, well, here we go again. Like, then it just like turns into this nuclear thing that, right? But if you see in his eyes that he's triggered and he's like, hey, hon, like, hang on, I just got to deal with this. And he goes and he deals with it, and you're sitting there patiently and you're like, seriously? Like, oh, like, when are we going to get over this? When are we going to get over this? But like, he's like dealing with it, and he comes back present and engaged and there with you. That's progress.
Right.
And that's awesome, actually. And hopefully it doesn't stay like that forever, that it goes a bit more smoothly and right. But do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you got to understand, he's coming from most of his life, all of his childhood, probably living in a lot of secrecy and a lot of shame around his penis, around his sexuality.
Well, everything,
right?
His entire being, he's had it. Like, just, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and it sucks for you as his partner of like, seriously, but like, he's got a lot that he's dealing with, a lot of like faulty belief systems that are there to shame him, make him feel bad. And if he can realize, okay, I'm going to work through this stuff, I'm going to show up accepting myself, that's awesome. But it could take him a little bit of time.
So in your like experience and how you've worked with couples and partners, what is the best way to, I know it starts with individual work, right? But working on your arousal template, because when that's been programmed from very unhealthy views and then the shame and secrecy around it, what's that process even look like?
This is a tricky question, and because of triggers on both sides. So in a perfect world, both partners can be completely open about their arousal template with each other. And on that arousal template, there's probably some things that are like, whoa, like that's kind of crazy or off or uncomfortable. And to be able to talk openly about it is a good thing in a relationship. The question is can that couple hold that space and still be committed to whatever safety and fidelity is in the relationship? Like, can my partner say to me, I have these feelings or those or whatever, and I'm not like, oh my gosh, you're gonna go do this, but I'm like, oh, interesting. But I trust you that you're not gonna go act out in this way or that way or whatever way. But I really appreciate you being so open and honest with me. And how in our relationship can I stay in my truth and still explore sexuality with you and you explore sexuality with me in our truths, right? Oh, you like this? Well, maybe we could do that or do this. And that fits within my truths, who I am. Now doing that doesn't. I can't do that. But it does here. So I'm all in for that. That sounds great, right? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I think for me, one thing that comes up, and I don't think that I'm alone because I've talked to other wives, but it's understanding like, where does that arousal template or that desire or that curiosity come from in wanting to try that? Because for us, I sit here back and I'm like, and my spouse has said, like, he learned how to have sex by watching porn. And I'm like, well, you really know, like, you learned how to do that, but how do you sit back as in my position and say, okay, how can I trust this is coming from a healthy space? And then how does he on his end look at his arousal template and really get, I guess, intimate with it and break it down of like, where is this coming from? Why is that on there? Or why am I curious about that? Is that healthy or not?
The thing about it is whether it's coming from a healthy space or not, it's there. So it's on the arousal template. And if we came back to, well, it shouldn't be there because that came from you watching porn or whatever, someone could say, well, okay, it's not there. That's a lie. It's there, right? And arousal template, like, it comes from different things. I think we're born with it, just like we're born with our personality. So we have some things that we're just naturally, automatically are on our arousal template. We're conditioned with it. So if you find porn at a young age and you see things or whatever, and that develops your arousal template. And then the third thing, and this is a fascinating one, is your trauma and your shame shapes your arousal template quite a bit, which a lot of people don't understand. And so your sexuality is a window into your healing, and so it's this thing where you don't want to shame it, but you also want to understand this is coming from a place of trauma. And so, yeah, a mixture of those. Go ahead.
I'm just hearing too, like, so in the process of that, whether it's deemed unhealthy or not by who, right? But it's breaking it down and building that relationship of where did this come from? And it's only unhealthy because of the belief system around it.
Yes.
So being able to say, this is what is going on sexually and early on in our relationship, I felt like I was shamed for something on my sexual template. Mm-hmm. And it was weird to find out later about my husband's addiction. Cause I was like, wait, what? Like, it was totally a table flip. Mm-hmm. But then later breaking down for me what that was, that I now look at as like, yeah, that probably would have been an unhealthy, like, thing to do together because of where it was coming from.
Yeah.
It wasn't coming from like a space of love and intimacy and connection the way that God designed it, right?
Right.
And so being able to, that's just what I'm hearing you say as you talk about, like, whether it's unhealthy or not, like, it's there. And having that, it's just a deeper gateway to your trauma and your healing, because
and if
information.
And if you get to do that together, then it's deeper intimacy. So if, like my wife's arousal template, if she really lets me know what's on it and shows me that, I get to know her on a level that is a lot deeper. If I understand, and I'm not talking about psychoanalyzing her, but like if she's like, hey, I want to do this. And I'm like, okay, like, tell me more. And she digs deeper and she says, I think it comes from this, and that. And I don't know if it's a healthy thing to go do that, but I want to. Oh, I know you now. I know your pain. I see you. Now, whether we go choose to do that or not, we through the window of sexuality and arousal template, I see your trauma, I see your pain, and I'll hold that with you. I'm not going to reject you, shame you, tell you you shouldn't have it. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to then say, okay, I'm in, boom, I'll go do it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like your example is perfect of like, you realized as you brought that to the table, you realized like, oh, there's something here inside of me. And by bringing it to the table through your partner and sexuality, you could see that. And it's a beautiful thing. That's intimacy is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you know each other like on that level, and then you mix it. Like it's okay, your arousal template and my arousal template, that's our sexuality together. And it's awesome, right? So
how, like, I look at this in a normal relationship without the sexual shame and without an addiction that's been going on for 18 years in our marriage. Just facing that without the addiction, the acting out, the shame, and the conditioning that my husband has got to be hard for couples.
Yeah. Yes.
So what, like, hurdles have you seen that are like beneficial that you could speak to, I guess, on overcoming that?
Well, I think what I'm kind of hearing you say is like, it's hard for a normal couple, and I put normal in because I've never met a normal couple. But it's hard for a normal couple, but then you throw in years of deceit and betrayal and shame around sexuality, then how do you do that? That it's actually a great question because, and it always comes back to this, and you might like roll your eyes at this, Carrie, but the reality is it's about trust. Is how do you do that? Well, what needs to be rebuilt, the foundation of that relationship is trust. And what's underneath trust is each partner showing up in actual real recovery. And if you start working on yourself, getting healthy, being a trustworthy human being, then you can naturally create healthy relationship and healthy attachment. So some of this intimacy stuff just automatically starts to take place because you can be vulnerable and honest, and it's not that scary to be honest. So a lot of times people get it backwards. Is what happens is the relationship starts to break down, and there's all these consequences in the relationship, and they're like, well, we need to fix our sexuality together, and we need to fix this and that because that's where it's all breaking down. That's the symptom. It's just the symptom. And so if you go address the actual issue, then the symptoms will go away. Right?
Mm-hmm. Which is something I loved, as you guys have talked to too, in disclosure, like learning too much detail. I talked to my husband a couple of weeks ago and I said, there's something that at the moment I learned in disclosure that I wish I could unhear. But as the healing has gone on and I've done my own and I've stopped taking things personal and doing all that other stuff and being able to look at it, it gave me a compassionate insight as to why that was there, as to why he acted, as to why that was a behavior that was had.
Yeah.
Because once I understood the underlying cause for it, it almost like made it more human because it made it less personal. It wasn't about me. Yeah. And I'm able to take a step out of it and be like, when he's asking for this is nothing this is this story. And when we can learn each other's stories intimately in every way, right? I think that gives us more of an insight to each other's hearts so we can connect.
Yeah. I want people to rewind back what you just said, because that right there is an indicator of real recovery, is getting to a place where you're not taking personally his stuff and you're actually having compassion back. Now, a lot of times that's scary for people because it's like, well, does that mean now I just have to be completely vulnerable with him because you have compassion for him? No. But it does mean that you're not making it about you and your own shame and your own stuff. And you can actually see his pain and his process and what's going on inside of him, which will, and if you can learn how to do that again and again, you'll be a safe space for him to be more honest and authentic and open about his struggles. And then you can start to create that intimacy. So
when it gives you that, you learn to become a safe space for yourself.
Yes.
Because you're learning to say, this thing happened, and he's learning his piece, but he also, like, have you ever read Radical Forgiveness?
I haven't.
Oh, it's one of my favorite. It basically talks about how we show up inauthentically to our characters and to who we truly are in our souls to help teach each other lessons. So after
interesting.
it was a really big handful, but I think it helps that person that don't take it personal thing, because I can look at my husband, I can say, why is his action triggering this emotion or this thought? And then thanking him for showing me, like, why it's
giving you an opportunity.
Gave me the opportunity to go within, right? And when you can get to that space in your relationship to where, like, there's things that he does where I'm like, oh, I still got to look at that. And then I remember, like, hey, thanks. But it's just, that book has been great for me in that concept, because it took that. I mean, and I listened to the podcast a couple weeks ago on not taking it personally with the 4 agreements. And it's realizing that, like, whether someone takes it personal or not has nothing to do with you. It's what you choose to do with that on your own. And moving forward, that is what matters. And that's what we're here for. Like, there's definitely things that I know my husband has not intentionally done, but the way it's come about in our relationship has sparked the healing needed. And I wish I could have had it another way, but I didn't take, I guess, the learning curve earlier on when God was like, learn this. Didn't. And so it had to get to this huge thing to where I'm, like, really having to look at it. And I can have compassion actually for my husband, and by saying, in essence, thank you for hurting me, because it forced me to look within. And that is a space that, like, it's really hard to get to. And I don't stay in it all the time, but it helps me process through my triggers quicker, knowing that, like, his actions are actually there to help me if I allow them to be that gateway.
As you're talking, what I'm hearing is accountability. And it's hard to say to someone who's been hurt and been hurt recently, like, don't take it personally. Like, that's the last thing they want to hear. And it's hard to say to someone, not only don't take it personally, but look at yourself and learn something about yourself and the way you're reacting to this. This isn't about you. That they, like, when they're in that pain, they don't want to hear that. But when they can get beyond that to that place that you're talking about, Carrie, that's where accountability is. And that's where agency and freedom is, to be able to say, wow, I'm not trapped by like what that other person does. I get to choose how I learn, how I grow, whether I feel happiness and joy and all those things. I get to choose that. And it's not all dependent upon them, because I'm not over attached to them. And that's an empowered place to be. And
it's kind of scary, actually, because I feel like that's where I'm at. And I'm kind of in a place where, like, so when I rediscovered things in October, there wasn't actually a lot of emotion. And I actually had, like, a question, like, am I just full of apathy? Am I just so, like, or am I to a point where I'm healed enough that I can step to the side and say, this isn't about me. But I'm almost like, where's that fine line of, like, it's not about me, but I still want to show up and be emotionally invested in this relationship. But I almost can't anymore, because the exhaustion of being continually triggered is outweighing, like, and does that, you get what I'm asking?
I think so. I think you're kind of asking what's the difference between apathy and acceptance. And, neutrality, actually. So like apathy is really a deadness in resonating energetically. It's like, I could care less. Like, I don't care. Acceptance is like, look, I don't get triggered off into like all this stuff. I can see what's going on. And because I accept it, I'm not triggered. I accept what's in my control, what's not in my control. I accept who I am. I know who I am, regardless of what you do to me. So I can actually resonate in some peace here, as the chaos goes on around me, and I can resonate in some peace as I have boundaries with you about how close I'm going to be or not, because I accept that this isn't about me. I accept that I'm going to be okay regardless of where this relationship goes. I accept that the pain comes when we have to disconnect. I accept those things. So I'm okay. That's not apathy. Apathy is just, there's nothing. There's just nothingness. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, and I'm over here looking at time too, and I'm like, I don't want to pull a Brandon and drop a truth like a bomb at the end, but I feel like and we may not even have time for it, but I feel like on a soul level, or on like a deeper heart level, like I feel like I have a lot of accountability with myself and my relationship. But I feel like physically I'm showing up in apathy, just going through the motions, I'm tired. I'm doing a lot alone and having those. So how do I within myself marry that accountability and apathy so that it's a healthy, does that make sense what I'm saying? Probably don't have time for that.
I think so. I think what I'm hearing you say is like, how do I overcome apathy when it comes to my self-care and taking care of myself physically? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I just got done with a personal training session and lifting weights. And I'm not saying this to brag. Like, I hire this guy because I have to have some accountability and support. And I just checked in with him, and he's like, hey, how'd your nutrition go this week? And I'm like, like, I did nothing. Like, yeah, but I think really that comes back to, in a lot of ways, my trainer was like, look, don't beat yourself up. And beating myself up is an apathy. If I'm feeling shame and guilt, that's not apathy. But like, do the next thing, like do something. And when we talk about inertia is what needs to happen, like just something today to actually start to nurture that. You want to get energy movement going and flow going, right? So, to answer your question, how do you do it? You just do something simple, and then there's a whole system. Then you can lay out a plan. You can do all this other stuff, but just do something. And your shame of being apathetic isn't going to motivate you to actually address it. Do you see what I'm saying?
100%, yeah.
But your self-love of like, hey, I love myself. I'm tired. So what I'm going to do today is like take a power nap for 10 minutes. And that's my thing physically today that I did, that I love, and it felt good. Boom, I feel awesome. And then you can add piece by piece from there. So that is a big question. We could do a full episode on that question right there.
As I had that question, I was like, probably save that for another time, but I'm curious. So
yeah. Carrie, I want to thank you for coming on. Your questions were awesome. I feel like I could do 10 more episodes with you, and that we're just scratching the surface. Sounds like you're in a pretty darn good place in terms of understanding recovery and what it is. But it sounds like there's some work to go in terms of like that trust building, intimacy building process with your husband. And
when I heard relationship accountability earlier, like our relationship, that's what's next to be created, is accountability, and as individuals and as the relationship. It's a whole nother unit.
Do you have a good therapist that you were working with?
No, and part of that is he's got 2 separate ones he's working with right now. I've done a lot of therapy. In fact, I had a therapist last October be like, you can't work on a relationship till he's ready.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like I'm kind of in that place, like waiting. So we don't have a couples therapist. I don't know that I'm ready for couples yet. I think I am. I don't think he is.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
he even said that last night. But it's really hard to find one that I feel like this is going to sound terrible or like cocky, but like when we did our disclosure, I felt like I could control the situation with myself and my therapist and my husband. And I'm like, I don't want to know where the session's going before,
Right.
or have it not be. I want to be able to stand there in my truth and then have someone call bullshit on me.
Absolutely.
And that's really hard. That's really hard to find.
It is hard to find. You're right.
Sorry for swearing.
No, it's fine. I think you're actually kind of right where you need to be. So you're ready for the couples work when he's ready. You know a lot of what you need to do for your own recovery. And there, I'm sure there's tweaks and there's things that you need to discover and work on still. And when you're ready for a therapist that will kick your ass a little bit, then I can find you one. So, but you want a couples therapist that understands all of the complexities and nuances of recovery, not just a couples therapist.
Yeah.
And so sounds like you're aware of where you're at. You're patiently waiting. Yeah. And
Not so patient.
and you shouldn't have to wait forever. It's okay for you to push a little bit of like, hey, when are we going to start to do this harder work together? So yeah. Carrie, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
That's fun.
If you're grateful for Carrie and her questions, then please leave a review and mention her by name and just say thank you. If this is helpful, then don't be shy to share it with somebody. And until next time, keep on keeping on. We'll see ya.